another episode of At the Table with Susan and Lucy. As you know, Lucy and I are co-chairs of a group of trade association products and other goodies from Italy, working to ensure that American consumers will always have access to these great, healthy, affordable Italian goods. So today, to kick off our first meeting of 2023, is our dear friend, Anita McBride, who is really, her maiden name is Anita McBride.
Bacqua. I know, not an easy one.
Bacqua. You think for a Molinary that would flow a little bit, but anyway, she is here because not only is she a Bavacqua, but she has an absolutely incredible resume, has led an incredible life on behalf of the United States government in connecting America and Italy. So we're just delighted to welcome you here with us today. There is no better person to interview for At the Table than Anita McBride. Lucy?
You're here. Thank you. Hello, Anita.
Hi, Lucy.
Anita, it's my job to give a short biography of you for our viewers.
Okay.
And I just want to say that starting out that Anita McBride's career epitomizes the phrase, good policy makes good politics. That is you. Anita has served in 3 different administrations, the Reagan administration, George H.W. Bush, George W. Bush, and notably was Laura Bush's chief of staff. And in those roles, Anita McBride followed the best kind of public policy in the White House, reaching out across the world and finding ways to empower women and improve healthcare and a number of other foreign policy initiatives. Currently, she is executive in residence at the Center for Congressional and Presidential Studies in the School of Public Affairs at American University. Wow. Her extensive experience has made her a valuable resource for policymakers, journalists, and students of American politics. And Anita has written a book. It'll be coming out soon, I understand, and it's entitled U.S. First Ladies, Making History and Leaving Legacies. We're going to be excited to discuss that.
Thank you.
And so, Anita, welcome. Thank you for being here. And if we could start off our discussion with your telling us, just as we are proud Italian Americans, so are you, could you tell us about your family's background, where they came from, maybe if you know when they came here, where they settled, things like that?
Sure. Well, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to join you. I was very excited about this, Susan and Lucy, for having me. This is very fun, and look for any opportunity to share the story of our Italian heritage and ultimately all of its contributions to our country, to the United States. But my family is 2 different regions. My mother was from the Campania region. My father was from the Calabria region. My mother emigrated here with her mother in 1930 from Campania. My grandfather, my mother's father, had already been here for some years, making enough money to bring them over. They settled in Bridgeport, Connecticut, where my grandfather had a brother who had come before him. My father came from Calabria, as I mentioned, and he came in 1929, so just a year before my mother did, and he sailed here by himself, or with his sister, his 19-year-old sister, and his father had been deceased, and his mother they left behind in Italy. His oldest brother had already been in the United States and had raised enough money to bring his my dad and his sister. They also settled in Bridgeport, Connecticut, and obviously a very tough time economically in this country. That was the era of the Depression. But my father was very lucky. His brother had already been somewhat established in Connecticut, was able to house them, feed them, clothe them, and get them jobs. And that's, the very humble beginnings, a story that is repeated by millions and millions of immigrants.
Absolutely. Susan?
Thank you. Well, to the point that you're making right now, you've worked with 3 White Houses. What we're together here to talk about, and what we talk about is an association and a coalition, is the importance of the relationship between the United States and Italy, and one that sometimes we think is overlooked or taken, I don't want to say taken for granted in a bad way, but just assumed.
Sure.
And so working through your 3 stints at the White House and with the First Lady, we'd love for you to, talk a little bit more about the importance of those relationships, and with also talking about how trade is also important to maintaining those relationships.
Well, it's a really important point that you address, Susan, because honestly, Italy has influenced America and Americans who created our country. The political philosophy of the 1800s really influenced our founding fathers in the development of the documents that really guide our nation. Our Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson was very much influenced by philosophers at the time, Philippe Metzet, Filangieri, and it worked its way into how our system of government was set up, a citizen republic. And so that influence has extended over 250 years, not only in our founding documents, but in the things that we have come to expect about the U.S.-Italy relationship, our art, our culture, our cuisine. I mean, it was Thomas Jefferson who was the first person to serve macaroni in the White House when he was president. He had never traveled to Italy, but he had an Italian chef at Monticello. So over, which is really, an interesting part of our history. And then, as we come to understand now, and as you mentioned, beyond the culture, cuisine, design, architecture, it's the important economic relationship that we have, the trade relationship that U.S. and Italy has today. And also, beyond that as well, the security relationship, the defense relationship that we have. There's so many shared projects between our 2 nations, really capitalizing, on the talent, the great talent in science and industry out of Italy. And they're a reliable partner for the United States. And we're very, I think, we can say this is a reliable and trusted partner, and American presidents have all recognized that. And really starting since the 1960s with the Kennedys, John and Jacqueline Kennedy, who hosted Italian, leaders at the White House, every president since has done that.
Thank you. Fascinating.
Fascinating.
Lizzie.
Anita, also, I want to talk about a specific program that you were involved in.
Sure.
First Lady, and it was the initiative of her husband, George W. The opportunity with my husband to, because at the time he was the chairman of the Senate Budget Committee, we went on a bipartisan trip to Southern Africa.
Yep.
To 5 different countries. Because we wanted to see how PEPFAR, George Bush president's initiative to end AIDS in Africa, what it was doing, because that was enormous commitment.
Yes, it was.
Of time and money by the United States, with no other goal in mind but to save Africa.
Save lives. You're absolutely right.
About it, right? Yeah. And so we were there and we saw how you were saving Africa in every country we visited. And I might say not only from AIDS, with our enormous investment in doctors and nurses and clinics.
All the infrastructure.
All the infrastructure. Everybody who could get vaccinated would get vaccinated, right? And then in addition, cervical cancer, in extending the program.
That's right.
To cure that and to prevent it. So, first of all, I just want to thank you that having observed it up close, just tell us a little bit more about that, what your role was.
Well, you have explained it beautifully. And honestly, I think the fact that this question has come up just this week is, in fact, on Friday, February 24th is the 20th anniversary of the launch of PEPFAR. There's a big event going on in Washington, bipartisan event, with President and Mrs. Bush making a rare appearance in town, actually, to promote what the results have been after 25 years. It's measurable. It's 25 million lives on that single initiative alone. Save the continent of Africa. You saw it with your own eyes, and it extended beyond making vaccines available and testing available, because that was the big barrier. There was a stigma related to testing, much as it was here in our country in the 80s. So that platform of getting vaccines in the arms to save lives, preventing the mother-to-child transmission, which was a huge factor for the next generation of Africans. All of that infrastructure that was developed to deliver those life-saving medicines then later were used, as you mentioned, for treating cervical cancer, which, because President Bush felt, we've saved people's lives from AIDS, and now women are dying of a preventable disease. And how can we use this infrastructure? So I think the fact that this is the 20th anniversary and it's coming up for reauthorization, as you know, as your husband would know, the largest commitment to a single disease in history was the PEPFAR program, first at 15 billion, reauthorized for 30 billion, and now coming up again. So there's a big effort to reach the Congress, have that bipartisan support for continuing and extending PEPFAR. But, really at the end of the day, what I remember from all my trips with Mrs. Bush, we went to 15 countries in Africa, promoting the program, promoting the President's Malaria Initiative, African Education Initiative, the Millennium Challenge Corporation, all these things that really were characterized as the Renaissance of foreign assistance for Africa. What I remember most about that, which was the most important message Mrs. Bush wanted to bring home, but also bring to these countries. They were our partners, and this is all due to the generosity of the American people. And that was really important to President Bush. That's why he did not ever want his name associated with it, because he wanted to live beyond his presidency and not be, an honor to him. It really was an honor to the foresight of a president, but all presidents since have supported it.
Wow, it was.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Lisa.
I was just going to say, Anita, this shows, though, also, and maybe you talk about this in your book, but the evolution of first ladies.
Yes.
Can you just say something about that?
No, it's a great question. Thank you. And actually, those visits overseas with Mrs. Bush, because we went to 67 countries together. She went to 77 total in her 8 years. But I really, saw the relationships that developed between the spouses. And what was the similarity? They all want to do something that is helpful to their country. At least the majority of them did. And the African First Ladies was incredible working with them, because they felt this not a pressure, but a challenge, and also an opportunity that they were viewed as the mother of their countries. And they felt this real caretaking sort of responsibility. And so we worked together. Mrs. Bush worked with her counterparts all over the world on global health initiatives. We extended it also to breast cancer initiative that was in the Middle East, a global literacy initiative that worked with over 100 countries. So I think I saw this firsthand. I had a front row seat to history, is the shortest way for me to describe it. Then I saw the impact, the influence, and really the legacy of when this platform, this unique platform that's unelected, but yet very influential and powerful, when it's used well, it has an enormous sort of ability to change lives and to impact history. And that's overseas, as well as, of course, the legacy of American First Ladies at home and their work at home as well. So that really inspired me to, after I left the White House in 2009, I was approached by American University. I had gone there for just 6 months to finish my education back in the early 80s. And they sort of viewed me as an alum and reached out. They were looking for a way to sort of, because they were watching. Let me explain it this way. The president of the university said to me, he was watching with growing interest the continued influence and impact of first ladies, obviously with Mrs. Clinton, saw Mrs. Bush's work, and said, could I develop something that would examine that and examine their legacy? So I started with a conference series that we launched in 2011, and which continues to this day in partnership with presidential libraries and other historical institutions like the White House Historical Association, Library of Congress, archives. And we take this story on the road and work with scholars, work with other people like me who work for First Ladies, journalists who have covered them, and really promote their stories. And that really led to being contacted by a publisher about a year and a half ago, saying that it's an academic publisher, which was interesting, and said, there is no textbook that exists on First Ladies, not one. And so with two other co-authors who I've known through this process over the years, we wrote one. And it just went into its final editing January 31st. It had been tested in 4 universities over the fall. And the singular comment that was common to every student was, why didn't we ever hear this before? You know, in any history classes. You knew about Eleanor Roosevelt some, of course, it's know about Hillary Clinton, but the stories of our past, you know, and so the book covers from Martha Washington to Jill Biden, and really look at that arc, right? From Lady Washington, that's what she was called, to now Dr. Jill Biden. I mean, it just the progress and the fact that you have a first lady working outside the home, if you will, which is groundbreaking too. It's just been an incredible experience to dive into the history of our first ladies and what they've contributed, what they've tried to do, where they didn't succeed, where they made mistakes, how many of them really were the force behind their husbands to be president. Several of them wouldn't have been president without their wives, including one of the most underrated first ladies, just Bess Truman, who it was her family's connections that made it possible for Harry to have any political life. And very, you know, different period of time. She was his most important Senate staffer. She wrote his speeches, she did his schedule. And then obviously when he became vice president, it was a little different.
Sounds
it's
like
just incredible. So I'm really excited. It's coming out in August in time for the academic school year. And then the publisher has agreed to do a trade version, you know, for a regular market, which will come out by December.
That's just what I wanted to ask.
Because oh, sure. Sorry, Susan, I jumped ahead.
No, I can't wait to get my hands on it. It sounds fascinating and stories that need to be told.
Sure.
Accurately judge the history of our country. So I'm so glad you did that. So thank you.
Thank you.
You talk about having a front row seat to history. Obviously, you have been involved in a lot of this history. And thank you for all your amazing contributions to this country and this world. And I know you're continuing to do that. I know you're very active in the National Italian American Foundation. You have been for, dare I say, decades now.
You can never leave.
And very active in the White House Historic Society. And you have recently, or recently brought to my attention anyway, the combination of the two, where you're really using your access to these resources to talk about, and we referred to it a little bit earlier, but really sort of the architectural and cultural contributions that we may see when we're walking through the United States Capitol that we don't know were brought to us, this beauty by an Italian artisan. Can you talk about one or two that you have brought to the public and you feel strongly about?
Sure. No, I think it's so great. Thank you for asking that. And of course, you know, you who served in the Congress walked those halls, and you were surrounded by it. I mean, starting with, of course, the incredible fresco that's in the dome by Constantino Brumidi, you know, the apotheosis of Washington. I mean, just think about that incredible visual that's there for everybody to see. And then in the White House, you know, two of Brumidi's famous paintings that have been hanging in the garden room at the White House, the room that connects, you know, from the residence to the West Wing. And these have been there for years. I don't remember the exact date that they became part of the White House collection, but it's the paintings of freedom and liberty. And they are beautiful, large paintings that are on that wall, that every time you traverse that hallway, you see them. The Palladian architecture of the windows, you know, that was, even though the architect of the White House was Irish, the design of the building was a lot of classical architecture design of the Romans. And Jefferson, of course, loved that. He modeled Monticello after the Palladian architecture. So you have this enormous, you know, feeling, visual of Italian influence. In the Blue Room of the White House are two beautiful busts, one of Amerigo Vespucci and one of George Washington, carved by Italians, and they're right at the entryway that are there. The mantle in the green room was carved by an Italian. And they're just, yes, I mean, it's just, you know, it's important that Italian Americans understand the influence of Italy in the founding of our country, from the documents, of course, to, you know, the visual beauty of the nation's capital. And so one of the things that I did when I joined the National Italian American Foundation board, and then I was also on the White House Historical Association board. I continue to serve on both of those. But I had proposed that we do an international series of the influence of foreign countries on the United States. I proposed this to the White House Historical Association. And so we did, and we started, I said, I'm happy to chair this if we start with Italy. And so we worked the Italian ambassador, we worked with the historians at the Historical Association, we worked with NIAF, and we funded a conference on Italian influence in the United States. And we published a work that was really terrific, that really cataloged all of this, of the early influence in the art and architecture of the White House. And then, of course, many references to the Capitol.
Well, thank you for bringing that to all of our attention. I learn so much every time I talk to you.
Thank you. I'd love, well, you're talking to me about topics I'd love, and try and stay as, you know, informed and make, you know, and make it known to as many people as possible. So thank you for this opportunity.
Appreciate it. Lucy?
Yes. And Anita, our coalition is really all about food, right? And access to food. And I would just mention to you that Susan and I host, actually, as part of our social media series where you will appear, but we have a show that we call Mangia Bene Lucy.
Love that.
And what we do is we bring recipes, some of which one of us cooks.
I think I know.
And I go to restaurants and find the chefs to tell me this deal.
All from all the regions of Italy. And that is really fun to see how, like in Calabria, peppers are such an important part. You know, that's
exactly hot. Yes.
And Puglia with its olive oil. You know, I mean, so and you're doing Sardinia next, aren't you? and
Yes.
pasta. Yes.
Wow.
So my question to you is, do you have a favorite Italian dish, Anita?
Yes. I really love everything eggplant. Any way you can make it. Of course, the melon time, because I grew up, as many of you probably did too, and with gardens in the backyard, right? Everything was grown there. Yeah. And I remember, the first time the zucchini flowers when they appeared, and my grandmother would make, the fried zucchini flowers. I love that. I just have wonderful memories of that. The eggplant that was in the garden, and then learning how to make that eggplant parmesan. I know it's such a basic, but I love it. And the sad thing for me is no one in my family, my husband, Tim, my daughter, Giovanna, my son, Andrew, do not like eggplant. So I will always, if I see that on a menu and I'm out, I will always make sure that I order that because I love it so much. I mean, it's so hard to identify one food that we love, because we love all Italian food. One fun thing though, where I was growing up, the Italian parish in Connecticut, Holy Rosary, published a book of recipes of all the Italian grandmothers and mothers before they all passed away. I mean, everything was nothing was written down. And of course, nobody had measurements, but all these recipes are sort of documented. And that is my favorite cookbook is from the Italian moms and grandmas of Bridgeport, Connecticut. My husband has learned to make an amazing at Easter time pizza gain. The pizza rustica, but pizza gaina is what we called it in our dialect. Made it as good or better than anybody in my family. So Tim has graduated. Yes. They didn't eat very well in the Irish household. He ate very well in the Italian household now. So those are a couple of my favorites and traditions for us at home.
We're going to have to get our hands on that cookbook. Do you still have it?
I know, exactly. I think I still have a few of them. I'm going to have to get that to you.
That's amazing. Well, Anita, we could speak with you all day. And actually, I have. And I'm so grateful for this opportunity. Thank you so much for all that you have done for this country, for women around the world, for your friendship and your continued leadership. It just seems like you never run out of passion projects that are so important for all of us to hear about. I dare say I'd love to have you back in December when your book is ready to market.
Fabulous.
Time talking about the book and the reactions to it, how we can access it, and we can spend more than one show on the contributions of first ladies.
You'd love it.
To this country. So I'm so grateful. I'm going to let Lucy close it out, but I just again want to say thank you, Anita, for sharing so much of your time and your thoughts with us.
Thank you, Susan, for everything you have done. Right back at you. I've been an admirer of yours for decades and decades. I really adore you much.
Yeah, we're at that point where you can say decades and decades, girlfriend. Oh, wow.
Everyone, before we go, I just want to remind our viewers to stay connected to us at the AIFC. And you do that by following us on Instagram and Twitter, both at AIFC Coalition, 1C.
Love that.
For more At the Table with Susan and Lucy, please check out our website, www.aifccoalition.org. Anita, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Lucy.
Enjoy.
Thank you. Thank you for your great questions. I've loved it.